All right, welcome to another Baseball Opps Podcast with TopVelocity. I'm your host, Brent Porcio. We've been really rolling along well here with a lot of great information that we've been putting into these most recent podcasts. I hope they've been helpful. We've still got a lot more to come. That was my goal, was just to pump in as much good information for you guys into these podcasts. I hope they're helping. And there's so much more to learn here at TopVelocity. So, if you haven't learned more about us, go to TopVelocity.org. Look at our camps. That's what probably the most famous thing, most well-known thing we do is our velocity camps. And that's not just for pitchers. That's for position players. It's for everyone in the game of baseball. So learn more about that. Also, you can learn more about us on all of our social media. You're probably following us right now. You've heard about this through our social media. But there's a lot more to learn, guys. Our system is a full curriculum. It's not just tips and adjustments and tricks. It's actually a curriculum. It's a process of development, and that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over our youth physical development model, and this is a model that we follow. And we get a lot of questions around this. So I think a lot of those listening are going to enjoy this because either you're a parent with a young player coming up, or you're a young player coming up, or maybe even you're a coach, whatever. I think there's a lot to learn here to understand how do we develop, or what are we looking for in the development process? Like, what are the steps? What are the stages? What's important? What's not important through the ages of baseball? So if you're listening in or watching, that's what you're here for. We're going to talk about high velocity, low velocity at certain age groups. We're going to talk about training models and what we should be focusing on in training in certain age groups. And that's pretty much going to cover it. It's not going to be too complicated. It's just going to give us a good overall understanding of good development in really in life, but applied to baseball as well. So you're not looking at this. We actually have this in a cool poster that we have at TopVelocity and our performance centers have. It's called our TopVelocity Youth Physical Development Model. And it first starts off at the top, and it says it has the ages 2 through 22 plus. If you've followed us at TopVelocity, it's very common to come here at headquarters. We get typically, 12, 13 and up is what we get here. But if you see more in what we've done youth camps where we've had them down to 6 and younger. And then also too, if you see a lot of our performance centers, they have a lot of the younger athletes because they're working more on a local level than we are here on a national level. But the point is TopVelocity has programming for all levels. So if you ever had that question, what is TopVelocity? What ages are best for TopVelocity? Yeah, of course, you're going to see that 12, 13 and up more here diving into the velocity training. But we have beginner training. We have intro-level training, developmental training, all the way as young as you could start the game. And I recommend when it comes to parents and those supporting young athletes is they should be as much involved or more involved in the developmental process at the young ages. So a lot of the beginners programming we have comes with a lot of educational material. And that's the goal is to get the parents or whoever, the guardian, who's ever supporting these young athletes to help them and really help them understand the information, learn the process, and learn get the big picture very early so you understand the path, the best path to success through a career. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So next category, after age, we're going to go through age periods. And this is just looking at how we define age periods. Pretty much 2 to 4 is called early childhood. 5 to 11 is middle childhood. 12 to 20 here is listed as adolescence. That's puberty, right? And 21 up is adulthood. So rapid growth rate is our, I want to say rapid, that's the first one. This is growth rate. So looking at growth rate. So rapid growth is from 2 to 4 years old. Then we move into steady growth, 5 to 11. And then we move to adolescent growth, 12 to 15. And then we move to a decline in the growth rate. Now, everyone is going to grow at different rates, and that's one thing. If I could really drive home in this podcast is that just because your development or your growth development is behind doesn't mean it will always be behind. I was a late bloomer. It felt like that growing up, like I'm always going to be behind. Then eventually I grew bigger than most of my peers. That didn't happen until college. But the point is don't feel like or be concerned about your growth rate at a young age, because that is going to change, and it changes for everyone. And that's why it's very hard to set standards within the developmental levels. So it's very hard, even though we're going to talk about low velocity, high velocities at each age, it's very hard to set standards and say, okay, at age 12, everyone should be at this size, this weight, or within this range. It's very hard to do that because people just develop so much different. You get kids getting, typical things we see from adults, like a lot of hair growth or a lot of hypertrophy or muscle growth, at 12, 13, and then some aren't really getting that to 17, 18 maybe. So don't be concerned about late growth. If anything, if I could choose, if I could go back and live my childhood and choose, I would stay with late development. Why would I stay with late development? Because it built a better mentality. At the end of the day, mentality is what you're going to get you to stay committed longer in the game. And having struggle and adversity is really what builds better mentalities. So being late in development is going to make you want to work harder if you want to still be able to compete. Therefore, it's going to help develop a better mentality at a young age. You see it all the time. You see these young kids in the Little League World Series. I was watching the one from 2015. The kid's throwing 83 miles an hour, and he's 6 feet tall at 13 years old. And then I don't know where that kid is today. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's still playing today. But most cases, the kids that have that much early growth and development don't turn out to be as exceptional later in life, or even exceptional at all. So once again, let's not overvalue early development. I know they do scouts and in recruiting, it is definitely overvalued early development. Now, I do admit you should play that. You should play that card, and that's where physical training comes in. We're going to talk about that. So I like you being a late developer, but we're going to help drive that a little bit better with more physical training, and we're going to get into when we should start all this. So let's look at the next category, throwing velocity. So throwing velocity, we really don't start to define it until about 8 years old. So we can throw you into a low velocity, high velocity category. Hey, if you're well above this, congratulations. But once again, don't get too excited, because it doesn't mean just because you're throwing 75 at 13 doesn't mean you're going to be throwing 95 at 18. That has no correlation. I don't have the studies here looking at that, but I would guarantee you it has no correlation. Like, for example, just because you throw hard when you're young doesn't mean you're going to throw hard when you're old. But let's look at ages 8. So low velocity is 36, high velocity is 42. Ages 9, low velocity is 37, high velocity is 50. Age 10, low velocity is 41, high velocity is 55. These are just ranges, guys, and it's speculative. And it is based on looking at data on averages. So you're looking at averages here, okay? And once again, even if you're more than the low velocity, it doesn't mean you're not going to throw harder and later in life. So just take this with a grain of salt. So 11, 43 low velocity, 55 high velocity. 12, low velocity, 47, high velocity, 61. 13, low velocity, 55, high velocity, 66. 14, low velocity, 63, high velocity, 73. 15, low velocity, 65, high velocity, 74. 16, low velocity, 69, high velocity, 80. 17, low velocity, 71, high velocity, 85. 18, low velocity, 75, high velocity, 92. 19, low velocity, 79, high velocity, 93. 20, low velocity, 82, high velocity, 94. 21, low velocity, 84, high velocity, 95. And 22 plus, low velocity, 86, high velocity, 100 plus. You're right. Small percentage of the population ever gets under 100 plus, right? So the point is, to me, that is literally there just for people to have some sense of velocity. That, to me, out of all this, that's probably the least specific to real results. It's just gives you an idea, okay? And people always say that, okay, I'm 8 years old, I'm throwing 45. How old? Or, I'm throwing 45. How old should I be throwing next year? Or how old should I be throwing? Or how hard should I be throwing at 10 years old? When I hear that, I say, look, don't focus on velocity this young. Focus on the foundations of velocity. So at a young age, you should be focusing on the foundation that you're building that should develop high velocities when it's most important, when you get close to 16 years old and you're looking at college recruiting or college opportunity. So I'm not worried about it at a young age, but I am worried about what you're doing about your velocity and preparation for your future in the game. Okay. Let's look at the next one, training adaptions. So from ages 2 to 11, this is predominantly neural adaptions, age-related. 12 to 22 plus, combination of neural and hormonal maturity related. So what this is meaning is before 12, your emphasis should be on teaching your neurological system, teaching muscle memory, teaching coordination, control. These are the things we'll be teaching. And then when you get into the hormonal, 12 and plus, now we can start influencing more development. So you're growing through these years, but you're really not in a place when you get into adolescence, until you get to adolescence, where we can start driving more hormonal, a bigger hormonal response, ultimately for hypertrophy. And we're going to talk about that. And that's growth. That's physical growth. But that should not be a focus till somewhere after 12, not even 12, somewhere after 12. So you got to be careful in your training. And we're going to talk about this. So let's look at the next one, physical qualities. So from 2 to 8, it's called fundamental movement training. And that goes along with the predominantly neural adaptation. So fundamental movement training or fundamental movement training. So what that means is we're working on fundamental movement. We're working on how to squat correctly, how to lunge correctly, how to run correctly, how to jump correctly, how to jump in different directions. Like those are basic foundations of fundamental movement. That should be the focus, right? Because we need that foundation before we move on to what's called sport-specific training. And that comes 12 to 22 plus. So sport-specific training is basically what that means is, applying it to the skill. So now it's, okay, let's focus on the pitching movement. Let's focus on the hitting movement. Let's focus on the, the whatever other sports you're playing. So that's where we should spend more time on the skill. So we're still working on this at a young age, but it's more of an emphasis. So we want to spend more time in the skill development, 12 and up. When we're 2 to 8, when we want to spend more time less time in the skill development, more time in the fundamental movement development, squatting, jumping, sprinting, like things like that, simple stuff. Okay. Now we can look at all the other important things to physical development and skill development. So that's looking at mobility, agility, speed, power, strength. Okay. Always working on these things. So we're always working on these things from 2 to 22 plus. They become more important in development from 5 to 11. It starts to become more important. Mobility, agility, speed, power, strength. It becomes even more important 12 to 16. And then the most important at about 14 is hypertrophy. And that's where your strength is driving growth. And that's when body size comes in. That's when the boys want to start gaining weight. Even the girls would probably want to start gaining weight. It's when we start focusing on physical size and mass, okay? The problem is if we focus on hypertrophy or we try to drive hypertrophy too young, pre-adolescent, we're going to struggle with the actual genetic response to resistance. You're not going to get a great hormonal response which creates growth pre-adolescence. So that's why you don't want to be really spending a lot of time trying to move a lot of weight. That's really should come when your body's ready to combat that hormonally. Then the last one, anaerobic conditioning. What's anaerobic conditioning? That's building specifically for our sport, which is a speed power sport, baseball. Anaerobic conditioning is buffering or conditioning your body to store more explosive energy. That is always a part of your training process, but not really till after the end of the hypertrophy phase, around 17 and up, where anaerobic conditioning becomes very important. The reason it's not as important before that is because it can steal energy from the other things like the fundamental movement training, which is the neurological adaptations. We want to put all of our energy developing better coordination very young. Then the next phase, we want to put more of our energy developing size into adolescence. Then once we start developing good size, now we can start putting more of that energy into building the energy to drive that. So the point is why waste our energy to force an adaptation to store more power, more explosive speed, when your body needs energy to grow and initially to basically teach good muscle memory. So the point is we don't really get into the explosive energy development until the end of the process of physical development, out of functional movement training through hypertrophy and growth development, and then we can start working on all the speed and agility and anaerobic conditioning development that we can do. The next one we look at is training structure, and that's going to basically be purely built around temperament. Okay, for example, the first thing that in your training structure from ages 2 to 5, it basically should just be unstructured. It doesn't need a lot of structure. It should be just simple stuff. Like you could teach them functional movement training through like little simple games and stuff, right? Because they can't really handle structure at that young of an age. They're just don't have the temperament and they don't have the training, the maturity to stay focused long enough. Okay. And once again, like when I said in the beginning, at Top Velocity, you see typically more 12 and up ages here because Top Velocity is a more moderate to high and advanced structure of training. And the next step from 5 to 11 or 5 to 10 is a low structure. And that's where we start to incorporate the beginner training, the intro level training with all this. And then at 11 or 12, we start bringing in moderate training, right? So moderate structure. And then at 14, high structure. Then at 19, very high structure. So you're going to see that in the Top Velocity programs. You're going to have a beginner, a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And every level gets more challenging, more structured. So that's important to note too. But once again, kind of same thing on the velocity. In the development of each person is different. You can see some kids are able through a better temperament at a younger age, more maturity, to handle moderate structure at a younger age than others. For me, late bloomer, I swear I couldn't handle moderate structure until I was 16 years old. But you can see that here. It actually gives you, say for moderate structure, it gives you 11 to 15, right? Or 14. So some might be happening at 11. They can handle 11, and others can't handle it to 14. So it does give you a range here. But once again, you might take forever for your temperament, your learning abilities, and I had disabilities, I was dyslexic, to catch up, or where you are mature enough to handle how you learn or best process information. But it might come later, but then your maturity kicks in and then all of a sudden you take off, you explode. So don't freak out if you feel like your child, the kid you're teaching is struggling to handle structure. It might come later on. Level, this is defining the level of the game: youth, high school, college, and pro. So youth is typically from 2 to about 12, and then 13 to 17 is high school, or 18. College is 19 to 21, and then pro 21, 22 plus that. Okay, so pretty good just walk through of youth development. I think that gives you something tangible to hold on to, helps you, if you're a young player, parent, coach, like I said, get a good map, layout, model of what a good way to structure development. Okay, so I hope that helps. Like I said, you can go through the podcast here. If anyone would like to get the actual layout that we have, this little banner we have, I could post it up for you. But you'll see it here at Top Velocity. You'll see it in the Top Velocity Performance Centers. And that really helps. If you have any questions, post them below. We appreciate you following along, and we'll see you on the next episode.